Well, good evening and welcome to the Idahoan Show. You know, it occurred to me that in the philosophical episodes I've done to date, I've laid out some of the basic tenets of Christian doctrine, tried to explain what I believe, but I haven't really gone into why I believe what I believe. And so tonight I thought I would take a minute to discuss sort of the basis for my faith, at least give you a brief synopsis of why I believe in God, believe in the accuracy of Scripture, and so forth. And it really comes down to three reasons, or rather I should say three classes of reasons. Now, the first class of reasons is what I would call the academic reasons. And these all basically boil down to showing that it is rational to believe in God, to believe in the accuracy of Scripture, and so forth. Now, there's a lot that has been said, a lot that has been written on this subject, and I don't by any means have time to recapitulate all of it here for you tonight, but I do want to give a few examples. Now, one example, interestingly enough, comes to us courtesy of atheist Stephen Hawking. In a paper titled The Space-Time Theorems of General Relativity by Hawking, Ellis, and Penrose, those three physicists derived a mathematical proof that if there is mass in the universe, which nobody really doubts. If you doubt it, go step on a bathroom scale and your doubts will be quickly allayed. And if the equations of general relativity provide an accurate description of the operation of gravity, which nobody really doubts in the physics community because that's been a very well-tested set of equations, then time must have a beginning. Now, physicists define time as the realm or dimension in which cause and effect take place. So, if the realm or dimension in which cause and effect take place itself had a beginning, or a cause, then that implies the existence of some causal agent capable of operating independent of the space-time manifold to which this universe is confined. And so, in this physics paper, these three physicists inadvertently proved the existence of the supernatural. Now, in a sad twist of irony, atheist Stephen Hawking has kind of spent the rest of his career trying to find a loophole in the proof that originally launched him to fame. But nevertheless, while that line of reasoning doesn't necessarily identify this supernatural causal agent as the God of the Bible, it certainly provides a compelling reason to believe in the existence of the supernatural, and I would point out that the idea of a supernatural entity who can bring into being the space-time manifold, the entire universe in which we live, is quite consistent with the portrayal of God in the Bible. Another academic reason that I like to bring up is based on the work of Dr. Hugh Ross. If you're familiar with the scientific method, the way we establish the reliability of laws of physics is to take the law or principle in question, use it to make predictions about what we should observe as far as results of an experiment or observations that we can take, measurements that we can take on natural observations. And then, we compare the predictions of the theory or law to the results that we get when we do the experiment or take the measurements. And so, what Ross and his colleagues have done is they've applied a similar method to testing the accuracy or the reliability of Scripture. And if you go through and catalog all of the testable scientific and historic claims that the Bible makes, and then test those against the record of nature and the record of history, what you quickly discover is that the Bible is quantitatively more reliable than the second law of thermodynamics. Now, as Ross likes to point out, the second law of thermodynamics governs diffusion, which is necessary for respiration, without which your body cannot function. And so, if you are by necessity, moment by moment entrusting your life to the reliable operation of the second law of thermodynamics, then it is only rational to also stake your life on the accuracy of Scripture. Yet another academic reason would consist of looking at the accuracy of biblical prophecy, or I should say the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. You know, the Bible does contain some prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled, prophecies of things that we expect to happen at some point in the future, but it contains a lot of prophecy about historical events that have already occurred. And so when you look at the prophet Daniel, for example, writing in great detail about historical events that transpired several hundred years after his death, that becomes a pretty compelling reason to ascribe the inspiration of Scripture to a supernatural source. And again, it becomes another reason for establishing its credibility. And these are certainly not the only examples I could give, but I think I'll keep it to those three for tonight. Next is what I might call the practical reason, or practical class of reasons. You know, as an engineer, when I'm given a problem to solve, I try to come up with the best solution that is available or that can be implemented. And sometimes I find that given the budgetary constraints and the other constraints that I have to work under, there really aren't a lot of options available. Sometimes you get in a situation where you just kind of got to take the best alternative that's available and run with it. Now, the Bible explains that mankind has a problem, the problem of sin. But you don't really need a Bible to tell you that humans have a problem with sin. I mean, look at the news. Worse yet, look in the mirror. I think it's pretty obvious that as humans, we all have a problem with sin. And so how do we go about solving this problem? Well, there's really only a few options out there. If you look at all the different religions of the world, some of them try to solve the problem by ignoring the problem, by telling you that the problem doesn't really exist. Ignoring the problem is not going to help you solve the problem. Some of them try to solve the problem through human self-discipline and ritual. Once again, that doesn't really work. You know, if you could fix a flawed system by just using the flawed system harder, mankind would have been able to overcome their problem with sin thousands of years ago, and we wouldn't even be talking about it anymore. And so, the Bible is somewhat unique in that it presents a solution to the problem of sin that's actually viable. It's a solution that's based entirely on what God has already done for us and is willing to do in us if we'll accept His offer, rather than something that depends upon our own strength or lack thereof. And so, again, going back to the academic reasons, there is good reason to believe that the Bible presents a good solution to the problem of sin. But even if we didn't have those proofs, we might as well take the solution and run with it because it's the only one we've got. And so that's basically the practical reason or class of reasons to believe in the doctrines of the Bible. Now, the third class of reasons is what I would call the experiential reasons. I think if you talk to anyone who's been a Christian for any length of time, we can give you examples of times that we've experienced examples of divine providence, divine protection, divine guidance, answered prayers, so on and so forth. And these experiences serve to corroborate the reasons we've already discussed and to strengthen our faith. So let me just give you one example from my own experience. One day when I was driving home from college after the end of the spring semester, it was getting late on the first day of the drive. It was a 2-day drive. And I'm driving across the desert. Off in the distance, I can see some mountains where I kind of initially intended to pull off and camp for the night. But I can also see some storm clouds building up, over the mountains. And so I got to thinking, I don't really want to camp out in the rain. I'll turn off on the desert and camp out here and, so I don't get rained on. And so I found a little 2-track dirt road, turning off the highway and followed it a little ways. I kind of noticed, though, that this dirt road was made of a very fine clay, and in some residual puddles from the last rainstorm that hit that area, I noticed that the mud that this clay makes is very slick. It has a coefficient of friction approaching 0, at least for effective friction between the mud and a car tire. And so I began to realize that if it did start raining that night, I was going to need to get up and hit the road immediately if I wanted to get back to the highway at all. If that road got too muddy, I might not be able to make it back, and I didn't want to be stranded out there. So I rolled out my sleeping bag on the ground next to the truck and went to sleep. Lo and behold, about midnight, I'm awakened by the light pattering of raindrops on my face. And, I look up, of course, the sky is all black, it's covered with dark clouds. I was exhausted. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to hit the road. I needed more sleep that night. So I offered up a simple prayer. I said something to the effect of, Lord, would you please just take this rain and send it somewhere that needs it more than this little patch of barren desert? And I think I said that a couple of times, and as I, in a couple of minutes, the rain let up, the pattering of raindrops on my face kind of ceased, and I opened my eyes again, and I see this little hole in the clouds, this little circular opening in the clouds directly above me, and I can see 1 or 2 stars through it. And I got to think, okay, if this is just, some fluke of nature, some natural occurrence, that hole is going to close any minute. The clouds are going to close in, it's going to start raining again, and I need to hit the road because I don't want to be stranded out here. But as I watch, this little hole expands in all directions, and the clouds just kind of dissipate. I don't know how you get clouds to do that under normal circumstances. Usually if a wind comes up or something, it blows the clouds away from one direction or the other, rather than causing them to dissipate, outwards in all directions from one point. But anyway, so this hole expands and gradually loses its circularity until I'm just staring up at a star-studded night sky with the Milky Way spread out across the heavens. And of course I eventually drifted off back to sleep, and when I got up the next morning there literally wasn't a cloud in the sky. So that's just one example of an answered prayer, of a very visible answer to a none too profound prayer on my part. And of course, this is one example of many examples that I could give, but I wanted to keep this video concise, so thanks for watching the Idahoan Show.